So for this project, we are going to build a Spotify connected application, so which will show the user their playlist, their, I don't know, music, what they've been listening up to, and just analyze the data and show it visually. So the first thing you want to do is head over to Spotify developers website and create an app. So here I've called it analytics. So you can just go over there, select on create app, and from there you will get a client ID and client secret, which is used for us to grab all the data that we need. So if we go back to the actual development part of it, what I've done is I've called the actual project Spotii, and within there I have the client and the server folders. The client folder is going to store the front end, so I'm using React for this with TypeScript. So you can go ahead and install that with Node. And then for the server side, I'm going to use Express, which I have also already installed. But if you haven't, you can just type in npm install express, and that will should do the job. So if we head into the server folder, I have created the server.js file, nothing written on it yet because we haven't started anything. So this is the basic setup of the project. So if you haven't, you can go ahead and set it up. If you don't know how to, then you can search it up, and that is about it. So yeah. So if we start by actually getting Express into our app, so we'll just call require Express, and we will also need to get it from get query string. This is usually used to pass in objects to the URL, or whenever we're making something, we need to pass it in, and it requires as a string format. So if we just install it with npm I install, and then call it up here just by saying require query string. Okay. And then we'll say the app is Express and set the app there. We also require the client ID and client secret, which I have kept inside my env file. So we'll call require.env and set the config path file to .env.local. You can just paste it directly into this server.js if you want it for testing purposes, but ideally you should hide it just so people cannot access it with you as like you basically. So if we go back into the documentation and web API, it shows a very good documentation on authorization and how it works. In simple concept, basically, what you're saying is this is to the user is I want these permissions. The user logs in, they accept it, and then basically you get all of these permissions to read their data. That is essentially the authorization process followed here, which is with OAuth 2. So let's start this by going into the actual file and setting the index location, which is just the localhost 5000, and then running that. So if we set the then we can set the redirect URI as well, which will be just the local 5000 port. And then we start the application with app.listen, and we will do this at port 5000, and once it's running, we will just say server is running at port 5000. Now, so what we want to do is when the user goes into something slash login, 5000 slash login, we will do something. But before that, we also need the scope, which is basically saying what permissions we require from the user or what they need to accept. So there is a really good documentation for this within the Spotify documentation place. So as you can see, I need the user library read, user top read. We need to be able to read their private and public playlists. So as documentation has a really good tutorial. Again, as I said, it gives you a whole list of everything that we require. So let's go in and set this login page. So what we're going to do is, as soon as the user hits into the login page, we will redirect them to a point where they can log in with their Spotify account. So we go into spotify.com/authorize, and we are going to stringify this object, which takes in our client ID. It takes in all the scope that we need. It takes the redirect URI, and then basically send it for authorization. So if I just run the server here for now, 5,000, just to check that everything's working perfectly. And as you can see, client ID is not defined. So this is probably some error to do with, I don't know, because I haven't defined the client ID, so which I haven't actually got it from my env file yet. So let me just do that with client ID and process. So if you are using .env, you actually have to install that and use this method, and hopefully this works now. Okay, now stringify. Okay, this is definitely a spelling mistake, so let's fix that. And then let's see, still does not like the client ID part. Let's see. Okay, okay, so it was basically just me calling the environment local file wrong, so my directory was wrong. So I set that up, and let's see, hopefully it runs this time around. I have been getting a lot of errors, so let's hope for the best. Okay, so it is working. All right, so because I have logged into this previously, it's been redirected to that page, and it looks like it's not working. Actually, let me just go into a private window browser and show you. In that way you can see what kind of things you will get. Let's run that, and as you can see up here, it is the Spotify login place. So if you just log in, it will ask for the permissions, click accept, and you will be redirected back to the main page. As you can see here, we have been redirected. So if we head back to the coding space, what we'll just do is, if we are at the main place, we'll do a request and a response. And what it does is, once you log in, it gives us a code, and we can use that code to get an access token, which we can use again to make some data requests. So first thing we'll do is just grab that code from the URL. So we'll just say an authorization code is just a request, and then we will get the query parameters, which is just the code, or it can be null, because sometimes we might have an error and it might not work. So just error handling basically at this point. And if we go back to the documentation here, you can see all the parameters that it will require. We actually need to make a post request to the Spotify to get the access token, and the Spotify documentation basically had all the parameters that we needed. So if I just start by here by creating a form and give it a grant type of authorization code, we'll actually set the code that we got to auth code, and also the redirect URI, which is back to this main page. Now we will just set the headers with the given things from the Spotify documentation. So let's just set that content type and the authorization. We just copy and paste from the documentation. Let me just copy the basic layout here, and then it also, authorization also requires it to be in base 64 string, so we will set that. So we'll send the client ID and the client secret as a base 64 string basically. And our final options, that is going to contain everything basically. So what I'm going to say is, firstly give it the URL from where we need to post the data. So that is just the API/token, I think. Yeah, in the Spotify. And then now we will give it the method of post. We'll give it the header that we just defined. We'll pass in our form as a string, so you're using query.stringify. And finally, json.true will means we'll get the output as a JSON file. Also, since we need to make a post request, we actually need to import request. So we'll just call it require request at the top. You need to install that with node, so just node npm install request, and then you are ready to use it. So let's make the post request here. So if we just say request.post, and we will pass in our options, the auth options just defined up here, and then so it gives the error response and the body. That's the response that we will get. Just for error checking, we will be like, if there is no error and the status code that we get from our response is 200, then basically we will just grab the access token and the refresh token from the data return. Otherwise we just return a response which is error basically. So I think after doing this, we have our access token is ready to be used, for just to make sure that everything is working properly and that we have defined everything as it should. Let's try to actually make a function that gets the users playlist, list of users playlist, and we will just see all the data within it. So so what we will say is a fetch user playlist. We'll create that as a synchronous function, and it will get in access token. If we go actually to the Spotify documentation and look at the endpoint, so you can get the playlist through spotify.com/users/playlist. But instead what I'm going to do is just change the users to me, so whoever is logged in, we will get their playlist basically. I think hopefully it doesn't cause error in the later stages, but it's fine for the time being. So okay, so we make that fetch from that API endpoint. We pass in the authorization with the bearer plus the access token, as defined within the documentation, and that should work. And once we have that, we can grab the data as a JSON file and then return that data. If we go back to the place where we defined the access token, from here we can just log in the we can call the get user playlist function, set the actual fetching to sync as well, and once we do that, we can log it to the terminal. Some errors, and as you can see, there is the whole list of users playlist that logged in as, and it gives you all the things like images, the name of the playlist, the person who made it, and everything else that you can use to display and do other things.